For 8 months, my husband convinced me that his affair partner was my new best friend. Lana would call me every evening, pretending to care about my day while secretly reporting back to him about my every vulnerability. She'd laugh about our conversations, mocking how easily I trusted her while she helped destroy my marriage from the inside. Then I discovered something about her own marriage that changed everything.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The coffee invitation I sent wasn't to her, it was to her husband, Colum, and what he brought to that meeting gave me the perfect weapon to destroy them both. The evening routine had become as predictable as clockwork. Mac would walk through our front door at exactly 6:15 p.m., hang his jacket on the antique coat rack we'd bought together during our honeymoon in Scotland, and call out his usual greeting, "Something smells incredible in here, Irene." I'd learned to time dinner perfectly to his arrival, just as I'd learned to time everything else in our marriage to his preferences. 7 years of being Mrs. Mac Cameron had taught me that harmony came through anticipation, through making his life seamless and comfortable. It was a lesson I thought I'd mastered until the evening he introduced me to the woman who would nearly destroy everything I'd built. "I met someone today I think you'd really like," Max said that Tuesday in late September, loosening his burgundy tie as he settled into his usual spot at our kitchen island. He looked more animated than I'd seen him in months, his dark eyes bright with an excitement that had been missing from our conversations lately. "Oh," I continued stirring the mushroom risotto, his favorite comfort food, while trying to read his expression. Mac rarely showed interest in my social life, preferring to keep our respective worlds neatly separated. His colleagues were his domain, just as my small circle of neighborhood friends was mine. Her name's Lana Shields. She just transferred to our Portland office from the Seattle branch. Marketing director. Brilliant, actually. Really sharp sense of humor. He paused, reaching for the glass of wine I'd already poured for him. She mentioned she doesn't know anyone in the area yet, looking to make some genuine connections. I thought you two might hit it off. I turned to study his face more carefully. In 7 years of marriage, Mac had never once suggested I befriend one of his colleagues. He'd always maintained strict boundaries between his professional and personal life, claiming it kept things uncomplicated. The sudden shift felt significant, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. "She sounds lovely," I said, genuinely meaning it. Since we'd moved to Portland 18 months ago for Mac's promotion, I'd struggled to build meaningful friendships. My old college friends were scattered across the country, and the neighborhood book club I joined had dissolved after 3 meetings due to scheduling conflicts. The prospect of connecting with someone new, someone Mac actually endorsed, felt like a gift. "I gave her your number," Mac continued, his voice carrying that casual tone he used when he was trying to make something seem less important than it was. "Hope that's okay. She might call tonight or tomorrow. She seemed really eager to meet you." The word eager stuck with me as I plated our dinner. Most people were politely interested in making new friends, but eager suggested something more intense, more desperate perhaps. I filed the observation away, along with the unusual circumstances of Mac's introduction. Lana called at exactly 8:30 p.m., just as Mac was settling into his home office to review some contracts. Her voice was warm honey over the phone line, with a slight southern accent that made every word sound like a confidence shared between old friends. "Irene, this is Lana Shields. Mac gave me your number and raved about you all afternoon. I'm honestly a little nervous calling, but I'm just so hoping we might be able to grab coffee soon." The vulnerability in her voice was immediately disarming. Here was a successful marketing director, accomplished enough to warrant a transfer to a major office, admitting to nerves about making a simple friendship. It made me like her instantly. "I'd love that," I found myself saying. "Mac mentioned you're new to Portland. It can be a challenging city to navigate at first." "Oh my goodness, yes. I've been here 2 weeks, and I swear I've gotten lost trying to find the grocery store 3 different times." Her laugh was infectious, the kind that made you want to laugh along even without hearing the joke. "I'm staying in this corporate housing situation downtown, and everything feels so temporary and sterile. I'm desperate for some real conversation with someone who actually lives here." We talked for nearly an hour that first night. Lana was everything Mac had promised: funny, intelligent, refreshingly honest about her struggles adapting to a new city. She'd moved from Seattle after what she described as a messy situation at her previous job, though she was vague about the details. Her husband, Colum, had stayed behind to finish up some projects with his law firm before joining her in December. 2.5 months of long-distance marriage, she said with a rueful laugh. Colum keeps joking that I'm getting a preview of single life again. Sometimes I wonder if he's right. The independence is both terrifying and exhilarating. The comment struck me as oddly intimate for a first conversation, but I attributed it to her southern openness. Some people were natural oversharers, and there was something refreshing about talking to someone who didn't carefully guard every personal detail. Well, you won't be lonely if I can help it, I heard myself saying. Portland has incredible coffee shops if you're interested in exploring some this week. Are you serious? I would absolutely love that. I've been surviving on the terrible corporate coffee at work, and I'm pretty sure it's actually getting worse each day. We made plans to meet Thursday morning at Cascade Coffee Roasters on Alberta Street, a place I'd discovered shortly after moving to Portland, but rarely had reason to visit. The prospect of having a coffee companion, someone to explore the city with, filled me with an excitement I hadn't felt in months. After hanging up, I found Mac in his office, bent over a stack of documents with his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as I entered, his expression expectant. "So, did you two hit it off?" "She seems wonderful," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "We're meeting for coffee Thursday morning. Thank you for thinking to introduce us." Something flickered across Mac's face. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief? I had a good feeling about that match. Lana's the kind of person who makes everyone around her feel more interesting. The phrasing was oddly specific, almost like he was quoting someone. But before I could analyze it further, Mac was already turning back to his documents, effectively ending the conversation. That night, as I brushed my teeth and prepared for bed, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The prospect of a new friendship, of having someone to talk to beyond Mac and our handful of acquaintances, seemed like exactly what I needed. I had no way of knowing that I was walking directly into the most sophisticated betrayal of my life, orchestrated by the two people I was learning to trust most. Looking back, I should have questioned why Mac had suddenly developed an interest in my social life. I should have wondered why Lana was so immediately intimate, so eager to share personal details with a complete stranger. I should have noticed that her call came exactly when Mac was occupied with work, ensuring he couldn't overhear our conversation. But trust, once given, creates its own blindness, and I was about to discover just how blind I'd become. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Portland feel like a postcard. I chose my outfit carefully, not too formal to suggest I was trying too hard, but put together enough to make a good impression. The navy sweater Mac had complimented me on just last week, paired with dark jeans and the leather boots I'd splurged on for my birthday. Cascade Coffee Roasters buzzed with the morning rush when I arrived, 10 minutes early, a habit I'd developed to avoid the anxiety of being late. I claimed a corner table near the large windows facing Alberta Street, ordering a lavender latte while I waited and watched the stream of cyclists and dog walkers pass by outside. Lana arrived exactly on time, and I recognized her immediately from Mac's description. Tall, with auburn hair that caught the morning light, she moved through the crowded coffee shop with the kind of confidence that other people stepped aside without realizing they were doing it. Her smile when she spotted me was radiant, genuine enough to dissolve any lingering nervousness I felt. "Irene, you look exactly like Mac described you," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "This place is adorable. I drove past it 3 times this week, but never had the courage to come in alone." "I'm so glad we finally made it happen," I said, meaning it completely. "What can I get you? Their chai latte is incredible if you like spices." "You're already spoiling me, and we just met. I love that." Lana's laugh was as warm in person as it had been over the phone. "Chai sounds perfect. I'll be right back." While she ordered, I studied her more carefully. Everything about Lana seemed perfectly calibrated. Her clothes were expensive but not showy, her makeup subtle but flawless, her body language open and approachable. She had the polished appearance of someone who'd learned to manage first impressions professionally, which made sense given her marketing background.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
So, she said, settling back into her chair with her steaming mug, tell me everything about Portland. Mac mentioned you two moved here from where? Chicago? Minneapolis, actually. Mac got offered a position with Brooks & Associates that was too good to pass up. I found myself relaxing into the conversation. It was a huge adjustment at first. The rain took some getting used to, and I miss having family nearby. Oh, family. That's always complicated, isn't it? Lana's expression grew thoughtful. Are you and Mac thinking about starting your own family soon, or are you focusing on getting settled first? The question caught me off guard with its intimacy. We'd known each other for exactly 12 minutes, and she was already asking about our reproductive plans. But something in her tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than nosiness, so I answered honestly. We've been trying for about 6 months now, I admitted. Mac thinks we should wait until we're more established here, but I'm 32. The biological clock feels pretty loud some days. Oh, honey, I completely understand that pressure. Lana reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Colum and I went through the same thing when I was your age. He kept saying, next year, until I finally had to put my foot down. Sometimes men just don't feel that urgency the way we do. You have children? I asked, surprised. She'd never mentioned them during our phone conversation. Something flickered across Lana's face, too quick to interpret, but there nonetheless. We did, a daughter. We lost her when she was 3, car accident. The words hit me like ice water. Lana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It's okay, she said quickly, though her eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. It was 5 years ago now. Colum and I dealt with it differently, which is part of why this separation feels so complicated. But that's way too heavy for a first coffee date. Tell me about your work. Mac mentioned you're a freelance graphic designer? The subject change felt abrupt, but I understood her need to shift away from painful territory. I spent the next 20 minutes describing my small but growing client base, the challenges of working from home, and my dreams of eventually opening my own studio. Lana was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights from her marketing perspective. She understood the creative process in a way that Mac, with his analytical legal mind, sometimes struggled with. When I mentioned feeling isolated working alone, she nodded emphatically. That's exactly why I'm so grateful Mac thought to introduce us, she said. I've been rattling around that corporate apartment like a ghost. It's beautiful, but so impersonal. I keep thinking if I could just find one real friend here, someone to grab coffee with and complain about the rain to, the whole experience would feel more manageable. Well, you found her, I said impulsively. I've been needing exactly the same thing. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly from topic to topic. Lana had opinions about everything: Portland's food scene, the best hiking trails, local politics, book recommendations. She was well-read, funny, and refreshingly direct in a way that reminded me of my college friends. I should probably head home, I said finally, glancing at my phone. Mac likes to have lunch together when he's not completely swamped. That's so sweet, Lana said, though something in her tone suggested she found it more amusing than sweet. Colum's the opposite. When he's working, I could set myself on fire and he probably wouldn't notice until the smoke alarm went off. Different marriage styles, I guess, I said diplomatically. Definitely. Lana stood and gathered her purse. This was exactly what I needed today, Irene. Would you be up for making it a regular thing, maybe Tuesdays and Fridays? I'd love that. The prospect of having a standing coffee date, a reliable social commitment to look forward to, filled me with more excitement than I'd felt about anything in months. Perfect. And hey, you should give me your address. I'd love to see your home studio sometime. Maybe I could even throw some freelance work your way, if you're interested. I wrote my address on a napkin, adding my cell phone number below it. Lana tucked it into her wallet with a smile that seemed particularly satisfied. This is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, she said, leaning in to give me a quick hug. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Lana was exactly the kind of friend I'd been missing: intelligent, warm, and genuinely interested in building a real connection. The fact that Mac had been the one to introduce us made it even better. Finally, we had something positive to share, a bridge between his professional world and my personal one. I couldn't wait to tell him how well the coffee date had gone. I had no idea that he was probably already hearing all about it from Lana herself, getting a detailed report on every vulnerability I'd revealed, every insecurity I'd shared, every detail about our marriage I'd been foolish enough to trust her with. The beautiful friendship she'd promised was already beginning, just not in the way I thought. Our Tuesday and Friday coffee dates quickly became the highlight of my week. Lana was everything I'd hoped for in a friend, consistently available, endlessly interested in my life, and surprisingly insightful about the small dramas and frustrations that filled my days. She remembered details from previous conversations, asked follow-up questions about my clients, and offered advice that seemed both practical and caring. "How did the meeting with the wellness center go?" she'd ask, referring to a potential contract I'd mentioned weeks earlier. "Did they end up going with your proposal for the branding package?" Her attention felt like a gift. Mac, despite his many good qualities, had never been particularly skilled at tracking the minutiae of my work life. He'd listen politely when I shared updates about my projects, but his eyes would often drift to his phone, or his expression would take on the glazed look of someone mentally organizing their own to-do list. Lana was different. She leaned forward when I spoke, maintained eye contact, and asked the kind of specific questions that proved she was genuinely engaged. When I landed the wellness center contract, she insisted we celebrate with expensive lattes and shared a chocolate croissant that she claimed we'd earned through her emotional support services. "You undersell yourself constantly," she told me that Tuesday, gesturing with her fork for emphasis. "Mac is lucky to have someone so talented and driven supporting the household income. A lot of men don't appreciate how challenging freelance work can be." The comment felt oddly pointed, but I was too pleased by the praise to examine it closely. Lana had a way of making observations that felt like compliments, even when they contained subtle criticisms of other people in my life. It was during our third week of regular meetings that Lana began asking more personal questions about my marriage. Not intrusive exactly, but detailed in a way that suggested genuine concern for my well-being. "You mentioned last week that Mac's been working late more often," she said. "How are you handling that? It must be lonely rattling around that house by yourself." "It's an adjustment," I admitted. "He's trying to make partner at the firm, so I understand the pressure. But sometimes I feel like we're ships passing in the night." "That's so hard on a marriage," Lana said sympathetically. "Colum went through a similar phase a few years back. I swear there were weeks when the only way I knew he'd been home was that the coffee pot had been used." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "Can I ask you something kind of personal? Feel free to tell me it's none of my business." "Of course," I said, though something in her tone made me slightly wary. "Are you and Max still connecting physically? I mean, with all the stress from his work and you're trying to conceive, sometimes that can put pressure on intimacy." The question caught me completely off guard. It was far more personal than anything we'd discussed before, crossing into territory I normally reserved for my closest friends or my sister. But something about Lana's earnest expression, the way she leaned forward with genuine concern, made the question feel less invasive than it should have. "It's definitely been more challenging lately," I found myself admitting. "Between his schedule and the pressure of trying to get pregnant, it sometimes feels more clinical than romantic." "Oh, honey, that's so common," Lana said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're not alone in that struggle. Have you talked to Mac about how you're feeling?" "I've tried, but he gets defensive. He says I'm putting too much pressure on him, that we should just let things happen naturally." "Men can be so frustrating about these things," Lana said with a knowing smile. "They want us to be available and enthusiastic, but they don't want to hear that we have needs too. Colum used to do the same thing, act like my concerns about our relationship were just me being dramatic." The conversation continued for another hour, with Lana sharing what seemed like increasingly intimate details about her own marriage struggles, how Colum had once gone 3 weeks without initiating any physical contact, how they'd had screaming fights about his inability to prioritize their relationship over his career, how she'd sometimes wondered if they'd married too young, before either of them really knew what they wanted. I probably shouldn't be telling you all this, she said finally, glancing at her watch. Colum would die if he knew I was sharing our private business with someone I just met. Your secrets are safe with me, I assured her, meaning it completely. It actually helps to know other couples go through similar things. That's exactly why I wanted to share, Lana said, gathering her purse. Sometimes we feel so isolated in our marriages, like we're the only ones struggling. But the truth is, every couple has issues they're working through. Walking to my car after that conversation, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Gratitude for Lana's openness and support, but also a nagging discomfort about how much I'd revealed about my marriage to someone I'd known for less than a month. There was something almost therapeutic about having someone to confess my fears to, but also something that felt like betrayal of Mac's privacy. That evening, I found myself studying Mac more carefully as he moved through our usual routines. Was he really working as much as he claimed? His late nights had become more frequent, and he'd started taking phone calls in his office with the door closed, claiming they were confidential client matters that required privacy. "How was coffee with Lana?" he asked as we cleaned up after dinner, his tone carefully casual. "Good," I said, then found myself adding, "We talked a lot about marriage stuff. She's going through some things with Colum." Mac's hands stilled on the dish he was drying. "What kind of things?" "Just typical couple stuff, communication issues, intimacy problems. You know how it is." "Right," Mac said, but something in his voice had shifted. "And you told her about us?" The question felt loaded, though I couldn't pinpoint why. "Just general things, nothing specific or private." "Good," he said, resuming his drying with what seemed like forced casualness. "It's important to maintain boundaries, even with friends." The comment struck me as hypocritical, coming from someone who'd introduced us in the first place, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I filed away his reaction as another small piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to realize existed. That night, as Mac worked late in his office and I prepared for bed alone, I thought about Lana's questions, her interest in the details of my marriage, her probing questions about our physical relationship, her encouragement to share intimate details about Mac's behavior and schedule. For the first time since we'd met, I wondered if there was something calculated about her curiosity. But the thought felt disloyal, both to her friendship and to Mac's judgment in introducing us. Lana had been nothing but supportive and understanding. If she asked personal questions, it was because she cared about my well-being. At least, that's what I told myself as I fell asleep in our empty bed, listening to the murmur of Mac's voice through his office door, as he conducted yet another late-night phone call that was supposedly about work. I had no idea that every detail I'd shared with Lana over coffee was being reported back to him within hours, analyzed and discussed as they planned the next phase of their deception. The woman I was learning to trust with my deepest insecurities was systematically cataloging them for the man who was supposed to love me most. The shift was subtle at first, so gradual that I almost missed it entirely. It began with small inconsistencies in Lana's stories, tiny details that didn't quite align with things she'd told me previously. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but enough to create a low-level unease that I couldn't quite shake. During our Friday coffee date in early November, Lana mentioned that Colum had called the night before to complain about a difficult client case involving a contentious divorce. "He was so frustrated," she said, stirring cinnamon into her chai. "This woman is trying to hide assets from her husband, and Colum's having trouble tracking down all the financial records. He said it's the most complicated case he's handled in years." I nodded sympathetically, but something nagged at me. 2 weeks earlier, Lana had mentioned that Colum specialized in corporate law, specifically contract negotiations for tech companies. When I'd asked if he ever handled family law cases, she'd laughed and said he found divorce work too emotionally messy to deal with. "I thought Colum focused on corporate clients," I said carefully. Lana's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, maybe, or calculation. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Oh, he does mostly," she said smoothly, "but his firm handles some family law cases, and when they're short-staffed, everyone has to pitch in. You know how it is with law firms, billable hours and all that." The explanation made sense, but something about her delivery felt rehearsed, like she'd had to think too hard about how to reconcile the contradiction. Other small discrepancies began accumulating in my mind over the following weeks. Lana had mentioned being an only child during one of our early conversations, but later referenced having to deal with her dramatic sister during Thanksgiving planning. When I brought flowers to our coffee date because she'd mentioned loving peonies, she seemed genuinely surprised and said her favorites were actually roses. "I must have been thinking of someone else," she said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Sometimes I get my conversations mixed up." Each inconsistency alone was easily explained away. People misspoke, forgot details, or conflated different stories. But together, they created a pattern that made me start paying closer attention to everything Lana said. The observation that truly unsettled me came during our Tuesday meeting in late November. Lana arrived 15 minutes late, which was unusual for her. She was typically as punctual as I was. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she seemed more flustered than I'd ever seen her. Sorry, she said, sliding into our usual booth. "Traffic was insane coming from downtown, and then I couldn't find parking." But Lana had told me repeatedly that she was staying in corporate housing downtown, within walking distance of her office. Why would she be driving from downtown to meet me at a coffee shop that was closer to my neighborhood than hers? And why would someone who supposedly lived downtown struggle to find parking in an area she claimed to visit regularly? "Rough morning?" I asked, studying her face more carefully than usual. "Just one of those days," she said, but her smile seemed strained. "Colum called while I was getting ready, and we got into this stupid argument about his travel schedule. He's supposed to be here next week for his job interviews, but now he's talking about postponing again." This was news to me. Lana had been counting down to Colum's visit for weeks, talking about apartment hunting together and finally having him meet her new friends. The sudden postponement seemed like the kind of major disappointment that would have come up immediately, not as an afterthought to explain her lateness. "That must be so frustrating," I said. "You were really looking forward to him being here." "I was," Lana agreed, but something in her tone felt off. "But maybe it's for the best. I'm finally feeling settled here, and his visits can be so disruptive to my routine." The comment struck me as oddly detached for someone discussing her husband's canceled visit. Earlier in our friendship, Lana had spoken about missing Colum with genuine emotion, describing their long-distance separation as the hardest thing she'd ever dealt with. Now she was treating his postponed arrival as a minor inconvenience. "Are things okay between you two?" I asked gently. Lana's response was immediate and perhaps a little too emphatic. "Of course, why would you ask that?" "You just seem less excited about his visit than you were before." "I'm just trying to be realistic," she said, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. "Long-distance relationships change people. We might not be the same couple we were when I left Seattle." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I found myself watching Lana's body language more carefully. She seemed restless, checking her phone more frequently than usual and glancing toward the coffee shop entrance every few minutes as if she was expecting someone or worried about being seen. When we parted ways that afternoon, I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine, trying to process the growing collection of inconsistencies and odd moments. Was I reading too much into normal human contradictions? Lana was dealing with a stressful job transition and a long-distance marriage. It made sense that she might be scattered or emotional. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our friendship. The easy intimacy that had developed over our weeks of coffee dates felt suddenly fragile, like it had been built on assumptions that weren't quite solid. That evening, Mac asked about my coffee date with his usual casual interest, but I found myself being more guarded in my response than usual. "How's Lana doing?" he asked, not looking up from the legal brief he was reviewing. "She seems stressed," I said truthfully. "Colum was supposed to visit next week, but apparently he's postponing again." Mac's pen stilled on the page. "Postponing? That's too bad. She must be disappointed." She seemed more relieved than disappointed, actually. Said his visits can be disruptive to her routine. "Interesting," Mac said, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. His expression was carefully neutral, but I caught a flicker of what might have been concern or calculation. "Why is that interesting?" I asked. "No reason," he said quickly, returning his attention to his brief. "Just seems unusual for someone who's been missing her husband so much." The comment lodged itself in my mind as I prepared dinner. Mac was right. Lana's change in attitude about Colum's visit was unusual, especially given how much she'd emphasized missing him during our early conversations. But what bothered me more was Mac's reaction to the information. He'd seemed almost satisfied by the news of Colum's postponement. As I chopped vegetables for our salad, I found myself thinking about the timeline of events. Lana's inconsistencies had started around the same time that Mac's work schedule had become more demanding. His late nights and private phone calls had increased just as my friendship with Lana was deepening. The correlation might mean nothing, but for the first time since Mac had introduced us, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that there might be more to their connection than a simple workplace acquaintance who'd mentioned needing friends. That night, as Mac worked late in his office again, and I lay alone in our bed, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would start paying attention in a different way. Not as a trusting friend accepting everything at face value, but as someone who needed to understand what was really happening in my life. The beautiful friendship I'd thought I was building might have been something else entirely. And if that was true, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before it was too late to protect myself. The revelation came through the most mundane of accidents. Mac had left his laptop open on our kitchen counter while he rushed upstairs to take a shower before our dinner reservation. I was simply closing it to protect the screen when a notification chimed, a new email arriving in his inbox. The sender's name made my heart skip. lana.shields@marketing.com. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Reading Mac's email would be a violation of his privacy, a line I'd never cross in 7 years of marriage. But the growing collection of inconsistencies and strange moments had created a knot of anxiety in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. I clicked. The subject line read, "Tonight's Intel." My hands began to shake as I read the contents. Mac. Coffee meeting went perfectly. Irene is getting more suspicious about my stories, but nothing she can't rationalize away yet. She mentioned you working late more often, and I could tell she's starting to connect dots about your schedule. I emphasized how isolated and lonely she must be feeling. Key updates. She's definitely trying to get pregnant. Mentioned her cycle timing and that you've been less enthusiastic lately. Still feels guilty about sharing marriage details with me, which means she trusts me completely. Noticed my slip about downtown traffic, but bought the explanation. Asked about Colum again. I think we need to have him cancel permanently soon. She's exactly where we need her. Vulnerable, dependent on our friendship, and sharing everything. Next phase? Can't wait to see you later. L. The laptop screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read the message again, then a third time, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My husband and my best friend were not only having an affair, they were systematically manipulating me, using my loneliness and trust as weapons against me. My legs gave out, and I sank onto one of our kitchen stools, still staring at the screen. 8 months of friendship, dozens of coffee dates, hundreds of intimate conversations where I'd shared my deepest fears and insecurities. All of it had been a performance designed to make me more vulnerable, more isolated, more dependent on the very people who were betraying me. I scrolled up through their email thread, my horror growing with each message. Months of correspondence detailing their affair, their plans, their cruel observations about my naive trust. Lana reporting on my fertility concerns, my work stress, my fears about our marriage. Mac responding with suggestions for how she could probe deeper, extract more information, make me more emotionally dependent on their deception. One exchange from 6 weeks earlier made bile rise in my throat. Lana, She asked if I thought she was trying too hard to get pregnant. So desperate and pathetic. According to his professional biography, Colum Jansen was a partner at Walker & Associates, specializing in high-asset divorce cases and spousal support litigation. Not corporate law, as Lana had originally told me, not contract negotiations for tech companies, family law, specifically helping people navigate the financial complexities of ending marriages. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. I dug deeper, cross-referencing public records and professional databases. Colum and Lana had indeed been married for 11 years, according to King County marriage records. Property records showed they owned a house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, purchased 8 years ago. Recent court filings revealed something even more interesting. Colum had handled several high-profile cases involving cheating spouses and hidden assets in the past 2 years. But the most revealing discovery came through the Washington State Bar Association's directory. Colum's contact information was current, listing him as actively practicing at Walker & Associates through the present date. No mention of any planned relocation to Portland, no indication that he was job hunting or preparing to join his wife in a new city. I leaned back in my desk chair, processing the implications. Either Lana had lied to Colum about her reasons for being in Portland, or she'd lied to me about his plans to join her. Given everything else I'd learned, I suspected both. My phone buzzed with a text from Mac. Staying late at the office, don't wait up. I almost laughed at the transparency of it. He wasn't even trying to maintain the pretense anymore, probably because he thought his secret was safe. In their emails, they discussed how completely I trusted them, how easy I was to deceive. They had no reason to suspect I'd discovered anything. That overconfidence would be their downfall. I returned to my research, this time focusing on Lana herself. Social media profiles revealed a curated life in Seattle, photos of her and Colum at restaurants, hiking trails, social events. The images were recent, some posted as late as last month. But here's what was interesting. None of the photos showed any indication of a separation or upcoming move. No goodbye dinners with friends, no packing boxes, no new adventure posts that typically accompany major relocations. Instead, the photos suggested a couple still very much living their normal life together. I found myself studying Colum's face in these images. He looked genuinely happy, completely unaware that his wife was supposedly building a new life 300 miles away. In one photo from just 6 weeks ago, he had his arm around Lana at what appeared to be a friend's wedding, both of them smiling broadly. The caption read, "So grateful to celebrate love with this amazing woman by my side." The timestamp made my stomach clench. 6 weeks ago, Lana had been having regular coffee dates with me in Portland, describing her marriage as strained and sharing intimate details about their supposed relationship problems. Meanwhile, she was posting romantic photos with Colum, presenting their marriage as strong and loving to their social network. Every piece of information I uncovered reinforced the same conclusion. Lana had never been separated from her husband. She'd never moved to Portland for a job transfer. Her entire story was a fabrication designed to make her available for an affair with Mac while maintaining her marriage in Seattle. But this revelation created new questions. If Lana was still living in Seattle, how was she managing regular coffee dates with me in Portland? How was she maintaining the pretense of a corporate job that didn't exist? And most importantly, what was Mac's role in financing and facilitating this elaborate deception? I pulled up our joint credit card statements online, something I rarely bothered to check since Mac handled most of our financial management. The pattern that emerged made everything clear. Regular charges to hotels in Portland, not the corporate housing Lana had described, but mid-range accommodations that someone would book for clandestine meetings. Gas stations along I-5 between Seattle and Portland, suggesting frequent travel between the cities. Restaurants I recognized as places where Mac claimed to be having business dinners during his late nights. They weren't just having an affair, they were conducting an elaborate double life, with Mac funding Lana's travel and accommodation while she maintained her marriage in Seattle and her friendship with me in Portland. The sophistication of their deception was breathtaking in its cruelty. By midnight, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of their betrayal. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy that would expose them completely while protecting myself from their inevitable attempts at damage control. That's when I remembered Column's specialty, high-asset divorce cases involving infidelity and hidden assets.
Mac, perfect. Keep reinforcing her insecurities. The more inadequate she feels, the less likely she is to question why I'm pulling away. Your wife is so easy to manipulate. It's almost boring. She believes everything I tell her. That's what makes this fun. She thinks she's finally found a real friend while we're planning our life together. The sound of the shower shutting off upstairs snapped me back to the present. Mac would be down in minutes, expecting to find me ready for dinner, unsuspecting and compliant as always. My hands moved automatically, taking screenshots of the most damning emails and forwarding them to my personal account before closing the laptop exactly as I'd found it. By the time Mac appeared in the kitchen, hair still damp and wearing the blue shirt Lana had requested, I had composed my face into what I hoped was a normal expression. "Ready for Ristorante Alba?" he asked, checking his watch. "Our reservation is in 20 minutes. "Actually, I'm not feeling well," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I think I might be coming down with something. Would you mind if we postpone?" Concern flickered across his features, genuine-looking enough that I wondered how many of his expressions over the past months had been equally calculated performances. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want me to stay home with you?" "No, you should go ahead. Maybe grab takeout from that Thai place you like." Relief flashed in his eyes before he masked it. "If you're sure, I'll probably be late. Might stop by the office afterward to catch up on some work." The lie came so easily, I almost admired his skill. He wasn't going to the office. He was going to meet Lana, probably to celebrate how perfectly their manipulation was proceeding, how completely they had me under their control. "Take your time," I said. "I'll probably go to bed early." After Mac left, I sat in our living room surrounded by the physical evidence of our life together. Wedding photos, furniture we'd chosen carefully, books we'd shared, and felt like a stranger in my own home. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been revealed as an elaborate fiction. But underneath the devastation, something else was growing, a cold, crystalline anger that cleared my thinking and sharpened my focus. Mac and Lana had made one crucial mistake in their perfect plan. They had underestimated me completely. They saw me as pathetic, desperate, easy to manipulate, a boring wife who could be deceived and discarded without consequence. They had no idea that the woman they were betraying had resources they knew nothing about, connections they'd never considered, and a capacity for strategic thinking they'd never bothered to test. I opened my laptop and began reading through the screenshots I'd taken, studying their correspondence like a battle plan. Every cruel observation, every manipulation technique, every detail of their affair was now evidence I could use against them. But I wouldn't confront them directly. That would give them the opportunity to gaslight me, to deny and deflect, and turn their betrayal into my paranoia. Instead, I would do exactly what they had done to me, gather intelligence, plan carefully, and strike when they least expected it. The first step was obvious. I needed to know more about Colum, if he existed at all, if their marriage was real, if there was anyone else in Lana's life who deserved to know what she was really doing during her supposed exile in Portland. Because if Mac and Lana wanted to play games with people's lives, I was about to show them exactly how those games could end when the other player finally learned the rules. The vulnerable, trusting woman they thought they knew was gone. In her place was someone who had seen the worst of human nature and was prepared to respond in kind. Their beautiful manipulation was about to become their worst nightmare. I spent the rest of that evening in what I can only describe as methodical fury. While Mac was presumably celebrating with Lana over dinner and whatever activities followed, I transformed our home office into a war room. Every email screenshot printed and organized chronologically, a notebook dedicated to documenting every Lana had told me,
every inconsistency I'd noticed, every detail that might prove useful. But my first priority was Colum Jansen. If he existed, he deserved to know what his wife was doing. If he didn't exist, that would tell me something equally important about the scope of Lana's deception. Either way, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with. The initial Google search for Colum Jansen Lawyer Seattle yielded immediate results. He was real, prominently featured on the website of Walker & Associates, a mid-sized firm specializing in family law. The professional headshot showed a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, exactly as Lana had described him. But here's where her story began to unravel completely. If anyone would understand the full implications of what Mac and Lana were doing, it would be a lawyer who spent his career helping betrayed spouses fight back against exactly this kind of deception. If anyone would have both the professional expertise and personal motivation to help me respond strategically, it would be the husband who had no idea his own wife was cheating. I stared at Colum's professional contact information for a long time, weighing my options. Reaching out to him would irrevocably destroy whatever remained of Mac and Lana's ability to control the narrative. Once I made that call, there would be no going back to the comfortable lie of my marriage or the false friendship that had sustained me for months. But the alternative, continuing to play the role of the naive wife while they laughed about my gullibility, was no longer tolerable. I copied Colum's email address into a new message and began composing what would become the most important communication of my life. Not a desperate plea from a betrayed woman, but a strategic proposal from someone who had evidence, resources, and a very specific plan for justice. Mac and Lana thought they were playing a game where they held all the cards. They were about to learn that they'd never even seen my hand. The real game was just beginning. The email to Colum took me 3 hours to write. I drafted and redrafted, weighing every word for maximum impact while maintaining professional credibility. This couldn't read like the desperate rambling of a jealous wife. It needed to be precise, factual, and compelling enough to convince a complete stranger to trust me with information that could destroy his marriage. Subject: Urgent information regarding your wife, Lana Shields. Mr. Jansen, my name is Irene Cameron. I believe your wife has been conducting an affair with my husband, Mac Cameron, while using an elaborate cover story involving a fictional job transfer to Portland. I have substantial evidence of their relationship and would like to discuss this matter with you directly. I understand this message may come as a shock. I am not looking for emotional support or drama. I am looking for strategic collaboration with someone who has both the professional expertise and personal motivation to address this situation effectively. If you are willing to review the evidence I've collected, please respond to this email. I believe we have more to gain by working together than by handling this separately. Respectfully, Irene Cameron. I attached 3 of the most damning email screenshots, enough to prove my claims without overwhelming him with details, and hit send before I could second-guess myself further. The reply came faster than I'd expected. At 6:47 a.m., while Mac was still sleeping beside me, completely unaware that his world was about to implode, my phone buzzed with Colum's response. Miss Cameron, I can be in Portland by this afternoon. Are you available to meet at 2 p.m.? Please suggest a location. Colum Jansen. The brevity of his response told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't surprised by my revelation. He was ready to act on it. This was a man who had suspected something was wrong, and now had confirmation of his worst fears. I suggested Pioneer Courthouse Square, public enough to feel safe, but with plenty of coffee shops nearby where we could talk privately. His immediate agreement confirmed that Colum Jansen was exactly the kind of ally I needed, someone who thought strategically rather than emotionally, who understood that the best revenge was thorough preparation. I spent the morning maintaining my normal routine while Mac got ready for work. Coffee together, light conversation about our respective days, the same domestic performance we'd been giving for months while our marriage rotted from within. But now I was the one with secrets, the one managing information and controlling the narrative. I'm having lunch with my sister today, I told Mac as he gathered his briefcase. Might be out for a few hours. That's nice, he said, kissing my forehead with what I now recognized as practiced affection. The casual lie about lunch plans felt like a small victory. If Mac could deceive me with such ease, I could certainly return the favor. I arrived at Pioneer Square 20 minutes early, using the time to study the people around me and plan our conversation. When Colin approached at exactly 2 p.m., I recognized him immediately from the photos I'd found online, though he looked more haggard than his professional headshots suggested. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance seemed slightly frayed around the edges. Irene? He extended his hand as he approached. Thank you for reaching out. I know this couldn't have been easy. Thank you for coming, I replied, noting the firm handshake and direct eye contact. This was someone accustomed to difficult conversations, comfortable with confronting unpleasant truths. Should we find somewhere more private to talk? We settled into a corner booth at a nearby coffee shop, both of us skipping pleasantries and moving directly to business. Colin pulled out a leather portfolio that suggested he'd come prepared for serious discussion. How long have you suspected? I asked. 6 months, he said without hesitation. Lana's behavior changed completely. New clothes, sudden interest in her appearance, secretive phone calls. Classic signs, really, though I hoped I was wrong. He paused, studying my face. How long have you known? I discovered it yesterday, but looking back, I think it's been going on for 8 months, maybe longer. Colin nodded grimly. That matches my timeline. Lana told me she was taking a consulting contract in Portland, working remotely for better work-life balance. I thought it was odd because she'd never expressed interest in consulting before, but she seemed excited about the opportunity. She told me she'd transferred within her company, said you were planning to join her in December after finishing up projects with your firm. I was never planning to move to Portland, Colin said flatly. My practice is here. My clients are here. Lana knew that. We never discussed relocating. The confirmation of what I'd already suspected still hit like a physical blow. Every conversation I'd had with Lana about her marriage, every detail about their supposed separation and reunion plans had been completely fabricated. There's more, I said, pulling out my phone to show him additional screenshots. They've been documenting their manipulation of me, laughing about how easy I am to deceive. Colin read through the messages, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he set the phone down carefully and looked directly at me. This isn't just an affair, he said. This is systematic fraud. Lana has been using marital assets to fund her travel and hotel expenses. She's been lying to both of us about her employment status and living situation. And your husband has been complicit in deceptions that could have serious legal implications. What kind of legal implications? Adultery, financial fraud, potentially identity theft if she's been using false credentials for her supposed job in Portland. Colin's professional demeanor had taken over, and I could see why he was successful in family law. More importantly, both of them have been conducting this affair using marital assets from both households. That gives us significant leverage in any divorce proceedings. The word divorce hung in the air between us. Until that moment, I'd been focused on revenge, on making them pay for their betrayal. But Colin was thinking several steps ahead, already planning for the complete dissolution of both marriages. You're thinking about ending your marriage? I said. I'm thinking about protecting my assets and my reputation, he corrected. Lana has made choices that put our entire financial future at risk. More than that, she's shown a level of deception and manipulation that makes any reconciliation impossible. I felt a surge of respect for his clear-eyed assessment. Colin wasn't driven by hurt feelings or wounded pride. He was making strategic decisions based on facts and long-term consequences. What about you? He asked. Are you prepared to end your marriage? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding since discovering the emails. Mac's betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the calculated cruelty of involving me in their deception, making me complicit in my own humiliation. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I can't stay married to someone who would orchestrate something this elaborate just to avoid an honest conversation about our relationship. Colum nodded approvingly. Then we need to discuss strategy. I assume you want more than just a simple divorce settlement. I want them to experience the same humiliation they've put us through. I want their deception exposed publicly, and I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else. All achievable goals, Colum said, opening his portfolio, but we need to be smart about how we proceed. The element of surprise is our biggest advantage right now. Once they realize we know about the affair, they'll start covering their tracks and preparing their defenses. He pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. Tell me everything you know about their routine. When they meet, where they go, how they communicate. We need to document everything before we make our move. As I shared details about Mac's schedule and Lana's supposed coffee dates, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not hope for reconciliation or forgiveness, but hope for justice. Hope that the people who had treated my life like a game were about to discover that games had consequences. Colum Jansen wasn't just an ally, he was exactly the weapon I needed to ensure that Mac and Lana's beautiful manipulation would become their complete destruction. Over the next week, Colum and I developed what could only be described as a comprehensive intelligence operation. We met twice more, always in different locations, always maintaining the appearance of casual encounters should anyone be watching. His legal training and my intimate knowledge of Mac and Lana's routines created a powerful combination. The key is documentation, Colum explained during our second meeting at a small cafe in the Pearl District. Emotional affairs are one thing, but what they're doing involves financial fraud, identity misrepresentation, and conspiracy to deceive multiple parties. We need evidence that will hold up in court. He'd brought a detailed timeline based on our previous conversation, cross-referencing Mac's supposed work schedule with Lana's Portland visits. The pattern was damning. Every time Mac claimed to be working late or attending client dinners, hotel records showed Lana checking into accommodations across the city. "How are you accessing hotel records?" I asked. "Professional connections," Colum said with a slight smile. "Family law requires a network of investigators, forensic accountants, and information brokers. When you're dealing with hidden assets and deceptive spouses, you learn to be creative about evidence gathering." The methodical approach was exactly what I needed. My initial impulse had been immediate confrontation, but Colum's strategy was far more sophisticated. We weren't just gathering evidence of an affair, we were building a case for systematic fraud that would have implications far beyond our marriages. "Here's what we know for certain," he said, consulting his notes. "Lana has been billing false travel expenses to cover her Portland visits. Mac has been using marital assets to fund hotel rooms and restaurant expenses. Both have been engaging in tax fraud by claiming business deductions for personal activities." Tax fraud? Mac's been writing off Lana's hotel expenses as client entertainment. Lana's been claiming business travel deductions for what are clearly personal trips. The IRS takes a very dim view of that kind of misrepresentation. The implications were staggering. What had started as a personal betrayal was revealing itself as a complex web of financial crimes that could have serious legal consequences for both of them. "But we need more than financial records," Colum continued. "We need proof of the ongoing deception and manipulation. That's where your unique position becomes valuable." He pulled out a small device that looked like a pen, recording device. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations as long as you're a participant. "I want you to continue your coffee dates with Lana, but now you'll be gathering evidence." The idea of sitting across from Lana, pretending friendship while recording her lies, made my stomach clench. But Colum's clinical approach helped me view it as a necessary task rather than an emotional ordeal. What should I focus on? Get her to elaborate on her relationship with Mac. Ask about her marriage to me. She'll probably share more fabricated details about our supposed problems. Most importantly, try to get her to admit that she's been lying about her living situation. I practiced the conversation in my head, imagining how I might steer our usual topics toward more incriminating territory. The prospect felt simultaneously empowering and nauseating. "What about Mac?" I asked. "Continue behaving normally. Don't let him suspect anything has changed. Can you do that?" The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. Could I share meals with Mac, sleep beside him, maintain the pretense of our marriage while knowing everything I now knew? The thought of his touch, his casual lies, his confident manipulation made my skin crawl. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "It's only for another week," Colum said gently. "I know it's difficult, but once we implement our plan, everything changes permanently. The temporary discomfort will be worth the long-term results." He was right, but that didn't make the prospect any less challenging. I would have to become an actress in my own life, performing the role of the naive wife while secretly building the case that would destroy my marriage. "Tell me about the final phase," I said.
Colum's expression grew focused, almost predatory. Simultaneous exposure. We coordinate our confrontations so neither of them can warn the other or prepare a defense. I propose a specific scenario that will maximize impact while ensuring we maintain legal and moral high ground. He outlined a plan so elegant in its simplicity that I almost laughed. Like Mac and Lana, we would use deception as a weapon, but our lies would be in service of revealing truth rather than concealing it. The timing has to be perfect, he emphasized. One mistake, one early revelation, and they'll circle the wagons. But if we execute correctly, they'll be so caught off guard they won't have time to coordinate their responses. And after the confrontation? Divorce proceedings begin immediately. I've already prepared preliminary paperwork for both cases. The evidence we're gathering will make property division straightforward. They'll have very little leverage to negotiate. The business-like discussion of ending my marriage felt surreal, but also liberating. For months, I'd been trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken, working to improve a relationship that was built on lies. Colum's approach offered something I hadn't expected: clarity. "One more thing," he said, checking his watch. "I need you to consider whether you want to pursue criminal charges in addition to civil proceedings." Criminal charges? Wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft. What they've been doing crosses several legal boundaries. The district attorney's office might be very interested in a case involving systematic financial fraud. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Mac and Lana hadn't just betrayed their spouses. They'd committed crimes that could result in serious legal consequences. What would that involve? Cooperating with prosecutors, providing testimony, potentially testifying in criminal court. It would make everything public and add significant legal jeopardy for both of them. I thought about Mac's legal career, his reputation, his carefully constructed professional image. Criminal charges wouldn't just end our marriage, they could destroy everything he'd worked to build. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course, but remember, they made these choices knowing the potential consequences. You're not responsible for protecting them from the results of their own actions." As we prepared to leave, Colum handed me a business card with his direct contact information. "Call me if you need anything, day or night. What we're doing requires perfect coordination, and I want you to feel supported throughout the process." Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of the recording device in my purse and the business card in my pocket. In 1 week, I would sit across from Lana at our usual coffee shop and record her lies while pretending to care about her fabricated problems. I would go home to Mac and perform the role of loving wife while gathering evidence of his betrayal. The woman who had trusted blindly for 8 months was gone. In her place was someone who understood that justice required patience, planning, and the willingness to be as strategic as the people who had wronged her. Mac and Lana thought they were master manipulators, but they were about to learn that they'd chosen the wrong victims. The game they'd started was about to end, and this time, I would be the one controlling all the rules. The Tuesday coffee date with Lana felt like walking into an interrogation room, except I was both the investigator and the subject. The recording device, disguised as an ordinary pen, sat innocuously in my purse while I practiced the casual expressions that had once come naturally.
Lana arrived with her usual radiant smile, sliding into our familiar booth at Cascade Coffee Roasters as if the past week hadn't fundamentally altered the nature of our relationship. Watching her perform friendship while knowing the truth about her motivations was like watching a stage play where only I could see the wires and makeup. "You look tired," she said, her voice carrying that practiced note of concern I now recognized as completely artificial. "Everything okay at home?" "Just having trouble sleeping," I replied, which was absolutely true. Mac's been working even later than usual. Sometimes I wonder if he's avoiding home entirely. I watched Lana's face carefully as I spoke, noting the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested pleasure rather than sympathy. She was enjoying my perceived misery, storing it away to share with Mac later. "That must be so lonely for you," she said, leaning forward with false intimacy. "How long has this been going on?" "Months now. And when he is home, he seems distracted, like his mind is somewhere else entirely." I let my voice crack slightly, giving her the vulnerability she craved.
"Have you confronted him about it?" Lana asked, and I could hear the careful calculation in her voice. She was fishing for information about whether I suspected anything specific. "I've tried, but he just says it's work stress, that I'm being too demanding." I paused, taking a sip of my latte while the recording device captured every word. "Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if there's someone else." The words hung between us like bait. Lana's response would tell me everything about how confident they were in their deception, how secure they felt in their manipulation of my emotions. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "I'm sure that's not it. Mac adores you. He talks about you constantly at work." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that I almost admired her skill. But the recording device was capturing every fabricated word of comfort, every false reassurance she offered while secretly celebrating my pain. "He talks about me at work?" I asked, genuinely curious about what version of our relationship Mac presented to his colleagues. "All the time. Just last week, he was telling everyone about that dinner you cooked for his birthday, how grateful he is to have someone who takes such good care of him." Another lie. Mac's birthday had been 6 months ago, and I'd made reservations at his favorite restaurant because I'd been too busy with client deadlines to plan something elaborate at home. But Lana delivered the fiction with such conviction that I could see how someone without my knowledge would find it reassuring. "That's sweet of him," I said, injecting just enough doubt into my voice to keep her talking. "Though it's strange that he never mentions you. I would have thought he'd at least comment on having such an attractive new colleague." Lana's smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching carefully. "We keep things very professional," she said. "Mac's not the type to discuss female coworkers at home. He's probably trying to avoid making you jealous." The irony was so perfect I had to fight not to laugh. Mac wasn't avoiding making me jealous. He was avoiding creating suspicion while he conducted his affair. But Lana's explanation revealed how thoroughly they'd thought through potential complications, how carefully they'd planned to keep their deception invisible. "You're probably right," I said. "I'm just feeling insecure lately. The whole baby thing has me on edge." "Any luck with that?" Lana asked, and I caught the gleam of interest in her eyes. My fertility struggles were apparently another source of entertainment for them. "Not yet. Mac keeps saying we should wait until his career is more stable, but I'm worried we're running out of time." I let genuine emotion creep into my voice, knowing that authentic pain would make the recording more compelling. "Sometimes I wonder if he even wants children with me." "I'm sure he does," Lana said, but something in her tone suggested she knew more about Mac's feelings on the subject than she was letting on. Men just process these things differently than we do. We talked for another 30 minutes, with Lana carefully extracting more details about my marriage while offering the kind of sympathetic responses designed to keep me talking. Every question felt calculated. Every piece of advice seemed crafted to increase my dependence on her friendship.
When we finally parted ways, I had nearly an hour of recorded conversation that documented not just her lies about her own situation, but her systematic manipulation of my emotional state. More importantly, I'd managed to steer the conversation in ways that would prove valuable when Colum and I implemented our plan. That evening, I met Colum at a small bar downtown to review the recording. He listened to the entire conversation through earbuds, occasionally pausing to take notes or ask clarifying questions. "This is excellent," he said when the recording ended. "She's clearly gathering intelligence about your marriage while feeding you false reassurances about Mac's faithfulness. The calculated nature of her responses will be compelling evidence in court." "What's our next step?" I asked. Colum pulled out his phone and showed me a calendar appointment. Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. I've scheduled a meeting with Mac under the pretense of discussing a potential client referral. He has no reason to suspect anything unusual. A client referral? I researched his practice areas and identified a case type where our firms might legitimately collaborate. He'll think it's a routine business meeting until I reveal what I actually know. The elegance of the plan was striking. While I'd been gathering evidence through continued deception, Colum had been setting up a confrontation that would give Mac no time to prepare defenses or warn Lana. What about my confrontation with Lana?
Saturday morning, your usual coffee date, but this time with a very different agenda. Colum's smile was sharp and entirely without warmth. By then, Mac will know that I know everything. He'll either have already contacted Lana or be frantically trying to reach her. Either way, she'll walk into your meeting completely unprepared for what you're going to reveal. The coordination required split-second timing, but the psychological impact would be devastating. Neither of them would have the chance to create alibis or coordinate their stories. Their beautiful manipulation would collapse under the weight of their own lies. "Are you ready for this?" Colum asked. I thought about the past week of pretending, the months of unknowing humiliation, the casual cruelty of their emails discussing my weaknesses. Most importantly, I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who could plan strategically, gather evidence methodically, and execute justice with precision. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it completely. Friday arrived with the kind of gray Portland drizzle that made everything feel muted and serious. I spent the morning maintaining my normal routine while checking my phone obsessively, waiting for Colum's text that would signal the beginning of the end. At 1:47 p.m., the message came. "Meeting confirmed. Recording begins in 10 minutes." Mac was about to walk into Colum's office expecting a routine business discussion. Instead, he would find himself face-to-face with the husband of his mistress, armed with months of evidence and a complete understanding of their deception. I tried to imagine Mac's expression when Colum introduced himself. The moment of recognition, followed by panic as he realized how thoroughly his secret had been exposed. The thought provided a grim satisfaction that helped steady my nerves for what was coming next. At 3:15 p.m., my phone rang. Colum's voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of controlled fury. "It's done," he said. "Mac knows that I know everything." The conversation was illuminating. How did he react? Exactly as you'd expect. Denial, then bargaining, then threats about legal consequences if I interfered with his marriage. He seems to believe that his legal training gives him some advantage in this situation. I could picture Mac falling back on his professional persona when cornered, trying to intimidate his way out of consequences rather than accepting responsibility for his choices. Did he admit to the affair? Eventually, but here's what's interesting. He tried to minimize Lana's role, claiming she pursued him and that he was trying to end things. Colum's laugh was bitter. According to Mac, he's actually the victim in this situation. The predictability of Mac's response was almost disappointing. Of course he would try to rewrite history, casting himself as the reluctant participant rather than the architect of an elaborate deception. What else did you learn? The financial scope is even bigger than we suspected. Mac has been using his firm's client entertainment budget to fund their affair.
Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, even jewelry purchases, all claimed as business expenses. The revelation hit me like ice water. Mac wasn't just betraying our marriage, he was committing embezzlement that could destroy his career and potentially result in criminal charges. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, $40,000 over 8 months, but that's just what I could verify from the records he was foolish enough to show me during our meeting. The number was staggering. $40,000 of stolen money to fund an affair that had turned my life into a performance for their entertainment. The casual theft was almost more insulting than the emotional betrayal. He showed you financial records? He was trying to prove that he could afford to compensate me for my inconvenience if I agreed to keep quiet about the affair. Apparently, he thought this was a problem that could be solved with money. Mac's approach revealed everything about how he viewed the situation, not as a moral failing that required accountability, but as a business problem that could be negotiated away with the right financial incentive. What did you tell him? That my wife's betrayal wasn't a business transaction, and that his attempt to bribe me would be included in my divorce filing. Colum paused. He's probably trying to reach Lana right now, but she won't answer. I had her phone service temporarily suspended this morning through a contact at the phone company. The strategic thinking was impressive. Colum had isolated Mac completely, leaving him unable to coordinate with Lana or prepare her for tomorrow's confrontation. How is that possible? Lana is still on my family plan. Technically, I have the legal right to manage the account. She'll assume it's a service outage until it's too late to matter.
I felt a surge of admiration for Colum's thoroughness. While I'd been focused on gathering evidence, he'd been thinking several moves ahead, creating conditions that would maximize our advantage during the confrontations. What happens now? Mac will spend tonight in panic mode, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. He'll probably attempt to contact Lana through email or her work number, but she won't get his messages until after your meeting tomorrow. The image of Mac frantically trying to reach his accomplice while she remained blissfully unaware of their exposure was deeply satisfying. For once, they would be the ones operating without complete information. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Colum asked. I thought about the recording device, the printed evidence, the months of accumulated anger that I would finally be able to express directly. More than ready, I was eager to watch Lana's confident facade crumble when she realized how completely she'd been outmaneuvered. What should I expect from her reaction? Denial first, then anger when she realizes the evidence is overwhelming. She'll probably try to blame Mac, claim she was manipulated or coerced. People like Lana always have someone else to blame when their schemes collapse. The prediction aligned with everything I'd learned about Lana's character. She'd spent months positioning herself as the victim of circumstances: an unhappy marriage, a demanding separation, a lonely exile in a new city. When confronted with the truth about her choices, she would undoubtedly find new ways to avoid responsibility. And after tomorrow? Divorce proceedings begin immediately for both of us. I've already filed preliminary paperwork based on today's admissions. By Monday morning, this will be a matter of public record. The finality of it was both terrifying and liberating. In less than 24 hours, the marriage I'd been trying to save would be officially over, but the deception that had poisoned it would finally be exposed. "Colum," I said, suddenly needing to acknowledge what his alliance had meant to me. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this alone." "We make a good team," he replied. "People who betray their spouses always underestimate the intelligence and resourcefulness of the people they've wronged. Mac and Lana thought they were playing against amateurs. They were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. The beautiful manipulation they'd constructed was about to become evidence in legal proceedings that would reshape both of their lives permanently. Tomorrow, the game they'd started would finally end, and this time, the people who deserved to win would be the ones writing the rules."
Saturday morning arrived with unusual clarity. No Portland drizzle, no gray clouds, just crisp November air that seemed to promise resolution. I woke before my alarm, my body apparently understanding that today would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life. Mac had spent Friday evening in what could only be described as controlled panic. He'd made several phone calls from his office with the door closed, speaking in hushed, urgent tones that carried through the thin walls. When he emerged for dinner, his face was drawn, and his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Everything okay?" I'd asked, maintaining the concerned wife performance one final time. "Just work stress," he'd replied, but his hands shook slightly as he reached for his wine glass. "Big case coming up." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. After months of sophisticated deception, Mac was reduced to the kind of obvious falsehoods that even a truly naive wife might question. His panic was making him sloppy, and his sloppiness was confirming everything Colum and I had planned. Now, as I prepared for my final coffee date with Lana, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The recording device sat ready in my purse, along with printed copies of the most damning email exchanges and a folder containing evidence of their financial crimes. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a presentation of facts that would leave no room for denial or deflection. I arrived at Cascade Coffee Roasters 30 minutes early, claiming our usual corner booth and ordering my lavender latte with the ritual precision of someone who wouldn't be returning. The familiar space felt different now, transformed from a place of friendship into a stage for justice. At exactly 10 a.m., Lana walked through the door with her characteristic confidence intact. She moved through the coffee shop like someone owned every room she entered, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse around her. Watching her approach with that radiant smile, knowing what I knew, was like watching someone walk unknowingly toward a cliff edge. "Morning, gorgeous," she said, sliding into the booth with her usual dramatic flair. "You look much better than you did Tuesday. Good week?"
Very enlightening, I replied, and something in my tone must have registered because her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, did something happen with Mac?" "You could say that." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, the recording app already activated. "But before we talk about Mac, I'd love to hear about your husband, Colum." The change in Lana's expression was immediate and dramatic. Color drained from her face as she processed the implications of my knowing Colum's name, the deliberate way I'd phrased the question, the recording device sitting openly between us. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully, but her voice had lost its usual warmth. "I mean your husband, Colum Jansen, who lives with you in your house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, the family law attorney who specializes in high-asset divorce cases and has no idea his wife has been conducting an 8-month affair with my husband." Each word landed like a physical blow. Lana's carefully constructed persona was crumbling in real time, her confident facade replaced by the trapped expression of someone who'd realized their elaborate deception had been thoroughly exposed. "How did you?" she started, then stopped herself. "How did I find out about your affair with Mac? How did I discover that your entire story about moving to Portland was fabricated? How did I learn that you've been using our friendship to gather intelligence while laughing about my gullibility?" I pulled out the folder of printed emails. "Or are you asking how I found your husband and invited him for coffee yesterday afternoon?" The last revelation hit her like a physical blow. Whatever composure she'd been trying to maintain evaporated completely as she understood that her husband knew everything, that her carefully managed double life had been exposed to the one person who could destroy it most completely. "Irene, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I opened the folder and slid the first email across the table. "Would you like to review your correspondence with Mac?
I particularly enjoyed the parts where you discussed how pathetic and desperate I am." Lana's eyes scanned the printed email, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. "You've been planning this," she said quietly. "For exactly 1 week. Ever since I discovered that my best friend was actually my husband's mistress, systematically manipulating me while reporting back to him about my vulnerabilities." I leaned forward, matching her earlier intimacy with something much more dangerous. "Did you really think I was too stupid to figure it out eventually? Max said you'd never suspect anything. He said you trusted people too easily, that you'd believe whatever we told you." The admission confirmed everything I'd suspected: their arrogance, their complete underestimation of my intelligence and capacity for strategic thinking. "Mac was wrong about a lot of things," I said, "just like you were wrong to think that playing games with people's lives wouldn't have consequences." Lana sat back in the booth, her earlier confidence completely destroyed. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked exactly like what she was: a woman who'd made calculated choices to hurt other people and was now facing the inevitable results of those decisions. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to understand that the beautiful manipulation you and Mac constructed is over. Your husband filed for divorce yesterday afternoon. Mac will receive his papers on Monday morning. And by Tuesday, both of your employers will have received detailed reports about your use of company resources to fund an extramarital affair." The comprehensive nature of our response seemed to shock her more than any individual revelation. This wasn't just about ending the affair. It was about ensuring that every aspect of their deception would have permanent consequences. "You can't do this," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "I've already done it." I gathered the emails and returned them to the folder. "The only question now is whether you want to tell me the truth about why you thought destroying my marriage was worth destroying your own, or if you'd prefer to save your explanations for the divorce attorneys." Lana stared at me across the table, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman she'd spent months trying to manipulate and destroy. The naive, trusting wife was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how cruel people could be and was prepared to respond with equal precision. The coffee shop around us continued its normal Saturday morning rhythm, but our corner booth had become a place where accounts were finally being settled, and justice was being served exactly as it should be: methodically, completely, and without mercy for those who'd shown none themselves. For several long moments, Lana sat in stunned silence, staring at the folder of evidence as if it might disappear if she looked at it hard enough. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all traces of the warm, confident woman who'd walked into the coffee shop 30 minutes earlier. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About the affair? 1 week. About your lies? Much longer, though I didn't want to believe what I was seeing." I took a sip of my latte, surprised by how steady my hands were. "The story inconsistencies, the convenient timing of your calls, the way you probed for information about my marriage, it all makes sense now. Irene, I need you to understand that this wasn't supposed to happen like this. Mac and I never intended for things to go this far." The attempt at damage control was pathetic. After months of calculated manipulation, Lana was trying to rewrite history as if their affair had been an accident rather than a carefully orchestrated deception. "Which part wasn't supposed to happen?" I asked. "The affair itself or getting caught?" She flinched at the directness of the question. "The friendship with you was real. I mean, parts of it were real. I do care about you, even though I know that's hard to believe now." "You're right, it is hard to believe." I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app, "especially since you've been systematically reporting our conversations back to Mac for 8 months. Would you like to hear some of your own words about how pathetic and desperate I am?" The blood drained from her face as she realized I had audio evidence of her manipulation. Whatever story she'd been preparing to explain away her actions crumbled under the weight of her own recorded cruelty. "Those recordings won't hold up in court," she said, grasping for any remaining leverage. "Oregon is a one-party consent state. Every conversation we've had where I was present is perfectly legal to record." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying her growing panic. But more importantly, Colum and I aren't just thinking about divorce court. We're thinking about criminal court. Criminal court? Wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement. You and Mac have been quite busy breaking laws to fund your little romance. The IRS takes a very dim view of people who claim personal expenses as business deductions. Lana's face went white as she processed the implications. This wasn't just about ending marriages. This was about potential jail time, criminal records, and the complete destruction of both their professional reputations. "You can't prove any of that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, we can. Mac was remarkably thorough in documenting his expense fraud. $40,000 in stolen funds, all carefully categorized as client entertainment and business travel." I smiled at her shocked expression. "Did you really think he was paying for your hotel rooms out of his own pocket?" The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Apparently, Mac hadn't shared the details of his financing arrangements with his mistress. Lana had been enjoying stolen money without even realizing it, making her complicit in crimes she hadn't known she was committing. "I didn't know he was stealing money," she whispered. "But you did know he was married. You did know you were lying to both your husband and me. You did know you were systematically manipulating someone who trusted you." I gathered the evidence back into the folder. Ignorance about the financial crimes doesn't excuse the emotional ones. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and for the first time, I heard genuine desperation in her voice. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You and Mac thought you could play games with people's lives without any accountability. You were wrong." "But what specifically do you want? Money? An apology? I'll do whatever you ask." The offer revealed everything about how Lana viewed the situation. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her wrongdoing, she still thought this was a problem that could be negotiated away with the right concessions. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "I want things for you. I want you to experience the same humiliation you put me through. I want your husband to know exactly who he married. I want your employer to understand how you've been using company time and resources. I want everyone who knows you to see past the performance to the person underneath." "You're destroying my life," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "No, Lana, you destroyed your life. I'm just making sure everyone else knows what you did." I stood up, leaving exact change for my coffee on the table. "Colum will be in touch with you about the divorce proceedings. I suggest you find a good attorney who specializes in cases involving adultery and financial fraud." "Irene, please." 8 months ago, you could have said please. You could have told me the truth, ended the affair, tried to salvage your marriage with honesty instead of deception. I picked up my purse and the folder of evidence. But you chose to turn my life into entertainment instead. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. As I walked toward the coffee shop exit, I could hear Lana's voice behind me, calling my name with increasing desperation. But the woman who would have turned back, who would have felt guilty for causing someone pain, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that mercy was earned, not owed. Outside the coffee shop, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Colum. "It's done." His response came immediately. "How do you feel?" I stood on the sidewalk in the crisp November air, considering the question seriously. How did I feel? Not triumphant exactly, but satisfied in a way I hadn't experienced in months. The weight of deception that had been crushing me was gone, replaced by the clean simplicity of truth. "Free," I texted back. And for the first time in 8 months, I absolutely was. The game that Mac and Lana had started with such confidence was over. They'd underestimated their opponents completely, assuming that betrayed spouses would remain passive victims rather than becoming strategic adversaries. They were about to learn just how expensive that assumption would prove to be. I drove home slowly, savoring the November morning and the strange lightness I felt after months of carrying the weight of deception. When I pulled into our driveway, Mac's car was already there, unusual for a Saturday morning when he typically claimed to have urgent work at the office. Inside, I found him pacing the living room like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he ended the call abruptly, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before: panic, calculation, and something that might have been genuine fear. "Where have you been?" he asked, trying to inject casual concern into his voice. "Coffee with Lana," I replied, setting my purse down carefully and watching his reaction. We had quite an interesting conversation. The color drained from his face. "Irene, we need to talk." "Yes, we do." I walked to our kitchen island and placed the folder of evidence on the granite surface. "But first, I think you should know that Lana's phone service has been suspended since yesterday. She won't be receiving any of your frantic messages." Mac's mask finally slipped completely. The confident attorney, the loving husband, the man who'd managed an 8-month deception with calculated precision, all of it crumbled, revealing someone who looked genuinely terrified. "How long have you known?" he asked, the same question Lana had posed. "Long enough to gather evidence, contact her husband, and file for divorce." I opened the folder and spread the printed emails across our kitchen island. "Long enough to document your embezzlement and prepare criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" His voice cracked on the words. $40,000 in stolen funds, Mac. Did you really think your firm wouldn't eventually audit those expense reports? Did you honestly believe that claiming personal affairs as business expenses wouldn't eventually be discovered? He sank onto one of our kitchen stools, his professional composure completely destroyed. "Irene, please, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Which part? The affair, the embezzlement, or the systematic manipulation of your wife through fake friendship?" "The friendship was Lana's idea," he said quickly, and I almost laughed at how predictable his response was. Even confronted with overwhelming evidence, Mac was already trying to shift blame to his accomplice. "So you're saying you were manipulated into conducting an 8-month affair?" I asked. "That you were somehow coerced into stealing money from your firm? That those emails discussing my vulnerabilities and mocking my trust were written under duress?" He flinched at each question, understanding that every excuse he might offer had already been anticipated and dismantled. "What do you want?" he asked, finally, echoing Lana's desperate question. "I want you to understand that you don't get to negotiate your way out of this." I gathered the emails back into the folder. "Colum and I spent a week planning our response while you thought you were still in control. The divorce papers will be served Monday morning. Your managing partner will receive a detailed report about your expense fraud Tuesday afternoon. The State Bar Association will get their complaint by Thursday." "You're destroying my career," he said, and I heard genuine anguish in his voice for the first time. "You destroyed your career the moment you started stealing money to fund an affair. I'm just making sure there are appropriate consequences for your choices." Mac looked around our kitchen, the space where we'd shared thousands of meals, planned our future, discussed dreams that now felt like elaborate lies. 7 years of marriage, and this is how you want it to end? "This is how you ended it," I corrected. 8 months ago, when you decided that manipulating your wife was preferable to having an honest conversation about problems in our marriage. I never meant for you to get hurt. The statement was so absurd, I actually laughed. You orchestrated an elaborate scheme to make your mistress my confidant so she could report back about my insecurities. You stole money from your firm to fund romantic getaways while I worried about our finances. You turned my desperate need for friendship into entertainment for you and your lover. I know how it looks. It doesn't just look bad, Mac. It is bad. Breathtakingly, systematically cruel in ways I never imagined you capable of. He sat in silence for several minutes, perhaps finally understanding that the situation couldn't be explained away or minimized. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Now you find somewhere else to live while we sort out property division. You hire a criminal defense attorney to deal with the embezzlement charges. You explain to your colleagues why your marriage imploded and your career is over. I picked up the folder and headed toward the stairs. And you spend the rest of your life understanding that actions have consequences, even when you think you're clever enough to avoid them. Irene, wait! He stood up, desperation making his voice crack. Is there any chance, any possibility that we could work through this? I turned back to look at him one final time. The man I'd married, the person I'd planned to spend my life with, the partner I'd trusted completely, all of it had been an illusion, carefully maintained until it was no longer convenient. You made your choice 8 months ago, I said. Now you get to live with it. As I walked upstairs to pack a bag for the hotel where I'd be staying until Mac found other accommodations, I heard him make another phone call. Probably his attorney, maybe his managing partner, possibly someone who might help him navigate the catastrophe his life was about to become. But for the first time in months, his problems were no longer my problems. His panic was no longer my responsibility. His consequences were finally his alone to face. The woman who had spent 8 months being systematically betrayed and manipulated was gone. In her place was someone who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Mac and Lana had played a cruel game with devastating skill. Now they would discover that winning games against people who don't know they're playing is very different from facing opponents who understand exactly what's at stake and are prepared to respond accordingly. The reckoning they'd spent months avoiding had finally arrived, and unlike their elaborate deception, this ending would be swift, decisive, and absolutely final. Monday morning brought the swift efficiency that only legal proceedings can provide. I watched from my hotel room window as the process server walked up to what had been our front door, carrying the divorce papers that would make Mac's nightmare official. Colum called at 9:17 a.m. Papers served. Mac tried to refuse them, but that's not how legal service works. How did he look? Like someone who'd spent the weekend hoping this was all a bad dream. Colum's voice carried grim satisfaction. His attorney called my office within an hour. Apparently, Mac wants to discuss settlement terms immediately. The speed of Mac's response revealed everything about his state of mind. The confident lawyer who'd orchestrated months of deception was now scrambling to minimize damage, suddenly eager to negotiate with people he'd previously viewed as obstacles to his happiness. What kind of settlement is he proposing? Complete financial responsibility for the embezzled funds, waiver of spousal support claims, and an uncontested divorce in exchange for us not pursuing criminal charges. Colum paused. He's also offering to resign from his firm rather than face termination for cause. The terms were more generous than I'd expected, but they revealed the depth of Mac's panic. He was willing to sacrifice his career and financial security to avoid the public humiliation of criminal prosecution. What about Lana? She's not in a position to negotiate anything. Her husband filed for divorce, her employer terminated her for falsifying travel expense reports, and she's facing potential charges for mail fraud related to her fake consulting business.
The comprehensive collapse of Lana's carefully constructed life was almost stunning in its completeness. Within 72 hours, she'd lost her marriage, her job, and her reputation, all consequences of choices she'd made with complete confidence in her ability to manage the risks. "How do you feel about accepting Mac's settlement?" Colum asked. I considered the question seriously. Criminal prosecution would provide additional satisfaction, but it would also mean months of legal proceedings, testimony, and reliving the details of their betrayal in public court. Mac's proposed settlement offered something potentially more valuable: complete severance from his life with minimal ongoing entanglement. "I think I want to be done with him," I said, finally. "Completely and permanently done. That's probably wise." Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving forward with your life while they deal with the consequences of their choices. By Tuesday afternoon, the broader consequences of Mac and Lana's affair were becoming apparent. Mac's law firm issued a brief statement about his resignation, citing personal circumstances requiring immediate attention. The professional community was small enough that speculation would fill in the details quickly. Lana's situation was even more dire. Unemployment in her field would be challenging given her sudden termination and the circumstances surrounding it. Her husband's divorce filing had been strategic and swift, leaving her with minimal financial resources and nowhere to live. "She's moved back with her parents in Tacoma," Colum reported during one of our coordination calls. "Apparently they're the only people willing to help her through this." The image of Lana, who'd been so confident in her manipulation and control, reduced to seeking shelter from her parents, was deeply satisfying. The woman who'd mocked my vulnerabilities was now experiencing the kind of complete life collapse she'd tried to engineer for me. Wednesday brought the final piece of the puzzle. Mac's former managing partner called me directly, a conversation I hadn't expected but found illuminating. "Mrs. Cameron, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened. We had no knowledge of Mac's misuse of firm resources, and we're implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar situations." "I appreciate that," I said, though the firm's culpability had never been my primary concern. "We've also recovered the full amount of the misappropriated funds and wanted to discuss potential restitution for the personal harm you've suffered." The offer was unexpected but welcome. Apparently, Mac's former colleagues were concerned about potential liability for enabling his embezzlement, even unknowingly. By the end of the week, the life Mac and Lana had tried to build through deception and manipulation was completely dismantled. Their elaborate scheme had collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, leaving them both worse off than if they'd simply ended their respective marriages honestly from the beginning. The irony was perfect in trying to avoid the temporary discomfort of honest conversation and ethical choices. They'd created permanent consequences that would affect them for years to come. Justice, it turned out, had its own timeline. And sometimes that timeline was remarkably swift when people finally stopped enabling bad behavior and started demanding accountability instead. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, brewing coffee in the French press I'd bought, to replace the expensive machine Mac had insisted we needed. The morning routine felt peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No performance required, no careful management of someone else's mood, just the simple pleasure of making coffee exactly how I liked it. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency. Mac's eagerness to avoid criminal prosecution had made him remarkably cooperative about asset division and settlement terms. I'd walked away with more than half our joint assets, the house, and a substantial cash settlement from his firm's insurance carrier. Colum had fared equally well in his proceedings. Lana's employment termination had eliminated any claims she might have made to spousal support, and her documented deception had influenced every aspect of their property division. "She's apparently working at a call center in Tacoma," Colum mentioned during one of our occasional check-ins. "Living with her parents, no car, using public transportation, quite a change from the lifestyle she was accustomed to." The information should have provided satisfaction, but mostly I felt indifferent. Lana's consequences were appropriate, but they were no longer my concern. My energy was focused on building something new rather than dwelling on what had been destroyed.
Mac's situation was similarly grim but predictable. His resignation from the law firm had made him virtually unemployable in his previous field. Legal communities were small, and news of financial misconduct traveled quickly. He'd apparently taken a position with a small personal injury practice, handling cases no established attorney would want. The most satisfying development hadn't been their professional destruction, but rather the clarity it had brought to my own life. The woman who desperately sought validation through friendship and marriage was gone, replaced by someone who understood that contentment came from self-respect rather than external approval. I'd started attending a support group for people who'd experienced systematic deception in their relationships. The stories were variations on familiar themes: manipulation, gaslighting, elaborate schemes designed to avoid honest communication. But what struck me most was how many of the participants had emerged stronger and more self-aware than they'd been before their betrayals. Trauma can be transformative, the group facilitator often said, if we choose to use it as education rather than victimization. My freelance design business had expanded significantly since the divorce. Without the emotional drain of managing a deceptive relationship, I'd found energy and creativity I'd forgotten I possessed. New clients, interesting projects, and most importantly, work that felt authentic rather than like a performance designed to please someone else. The financial settlement had provided security, but the emotional freedom had proven far more valuable. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based purely on what I wanted rather than what would maintain harmony in a relationship built on lies. Colum and I had maintained a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. We understood each other in ways that people who hadn't been systematically betrayed might not. But we were both focused on building independent lives rather than seeking validation through new relationships. "I think I'm finally ready to date again," he'd mentioned during our last conversation. "How do you know?" "Because I'm not looking for someone to fix what Lana broke. I'm looking for someone to share what I've built since then." The distinction was crucial. The person I'd been during my marriage to Mac had been defined by relationships, by how well I could anticipate and meet other people's needs. The person I'd become understood that healthy relationships required two whole people choosing to share their lives, rather than one person desperately trying to earn love through performance. Sometimes I drove past the coffee shop where I'd met Lana so many times, where I'd shared my vulnerabilities with someone who was systematically using them against me. The space no longer held any emotional charge. It was just a place where something important had happened, where I'd finally learned to trust my own perceptions over other people's reassurances. The woman who'd sat in that corner booth, desperate for friendship and validation, felt like someone I'd known long ago, rather than someone I'd been. The transformation hadn't been comfortable, but it had been necessary. Mac and Lana had taught me that some people view others as objects to be manipulated, rather than humans deserving of respect. But more importantly, they taught me that I was capable of strategic thinking, careful planning, and decisive action when my well-being required it. Their elaborate deception had been designed to make me smaller, more dependent, easier to control. Instead, it had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed, and clarity about what I would and wouldn't accept from other people. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured it into the ceramic mug I'd bought during a weekend trip to the coast, my first solo vacation in years. Outside my kitchen window, Portland was waking up to another gray November morning, but the apartment felt warm and peaceful. Justice had been served, consequences had been accepted, and life had moved forward with the kind of clarity that only comes from refusing to accept treatment you don't deserve. The game Mac and Lana had started was over. I'd won by discovering that the most important victory wasn't defeating them, it was reclaiming myself. 6 months after the confrontations, I received an unexpected call from the district attorney's office. Despite my decision not to pursue criminal charges, the state had opened its own investigation into Mac's embezzlement after his former firm reported the financial irregularities to authorities. "We'd like your cooperation as a witness," the prosecutor explained. "Mr. Cameron's case has revealed a pattern of expense fraud that may have affected other clients and cases." The investigation had uncovered additional victims, clients whose trust accounts had been manipulated, business partners who'd been defrauded through falsified billing records. Mac's betrayal of our marriage had been just one element of a broader pattern of financial misconduct. "Will testifying require me to relieve details about the affair?" I asked. "Primarily, we need testimony about the timeline and your knowledge of his expense reporting. The personal relationship details are secondary to the financial crimes." I agreed to cooperate, understanding that my experience might help prevent other people from suffering similar betrayals. The legal process felt like a final chapter rather than reopening old wounds. Lana had also been charged, though her case was less severe. Mail fraud related to her fictitious consulting business, along with filing false tax returns claiming business deductions for personal travel. Her attorney was negotiating a plea agreement that would involve restitution and community service rather than jail time. The criminal proceedings provided a level of closure I hadn't expected. Seeing their choices classified as crimes rather than personal failures validated the severity of what they'd done, not just to their spouses, but to the broader community. Mac's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. His attorney had requested character witnesses, but apparently few colleagues were willing to testify on behalf of someone who'd systematically stolen from clients and manipulated his wife through elaborate deception. The isolation he was experiencing felt like appropriate justice. Someone who'd shown such disregard for other people's well-being was discovering what life looked like without the support network he'd taken for granted. "How do you feel about his potential jail time?" Colum asked during one of our calls. "Honestly, relieved that other people won't have to experience what we did," I replied. The affair was personal, but the financial crimes affected people who trusted him professionally. The criminal justice system was addressing the broader implications of Mac and Lana's choices, while I focused on the personal growth that had emerged from surviving their deception. 1 year later, I stood in the gallery space I'd rented for my first solo art exhibition, a collection of digital designs and mixed media pieces exploring themes of deception, truth, and transformation. The work was deeply personal but universally resonant, speaking to anyone who'd experienced systematic manipulation and found strength in survival. The opening reception was crowded with friends I'd made through support groups, business connections, and genuine relationships built on honesty rather than performance. Colum attended with his new girlfriend, a family law attorney who specialized in helping domestic violence survivors. They seemed genuinely happy together, two people who'd learned to recognize authentic connection. "Your work is powerful," said Grace, my sister who'd driven down from Seattle for the opening. "But more importantly, you look genuinely happy." She was right. The contentment I felt wasn't dependent on external validation or relationship status. It came from understanding my own strength, recognizing my worth, and building a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large digital installation titled Beautiful Manipulation, an interactive piece that allowed viewers to peel back layers of seemingly perfect images to reveal the harsh realities underneath. The metaphor was obvious but effective. Things that appear beautiful on the surface often conceal systematic cruelty. Several pieces had sold by the end of the evening, but the commercial success felt secondary to the personal achievement of creating something meaningful from painful experience. Art had become a way of processing trauma while offering hope to others facing similar challenges. "I want to commission a piece," said a woman I didn't recognize, approaching as the reception wound down. "My divorce was finalized last month, and I'd like something to commemorate moving forward rather than looking back." Her request captured perfectly what I'd learned. The most powerful response to betrayal wasn't revenge, but transformation. Taking the worst thing someone had done to you and using it as raw material for becoming stronger, wiser, and more authentic. Mac's criminal trial had concluded 3 months earlier with a conviction and 18-month sentence, most of which would be served through electronic monitoring and community service. Lana had received a suspended sentence and was reportedly working at a nonprofit while completing her court-ordered restitution payments. Their consequences felt appropriate and final. Justice had been served through legal channels, while I'd focused on building something positive from the wreckage of our shared history. As I locked up the gallery that night, I reflected on the journey from that first devastating discovery of Mac's emails to this evening celebrating art created from authentic experience. The woman who desperately sought validation through a manipulative friendship was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important relationship was the one with herself. The coffee shop where I'd unknowingly been manipulated for months had become just another Portland cafe. The house Mac and I had shared was now someone else's home. The marriage I'd fought to save had been replaced by a life built on honesty, creativity, and genuine connections with people who valued truth over convenience. Mac and Lana's elaborate deception had been designed to make them happy at my expense. Instead, it had revealed my capacity for strategic thinking, decisive action, and remarkable resilience. Their manipulation had backfired completely, transforming their intended victim into someone stronger than she'd ever been. The best revenge, I discovered, wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt you. It was becoming someone they could never hurt again. Standing outside the gallery in the cool Portland evening, I felt grateful for the painful journey that had led to this moment. Not grateful for the betrayal itself, but for discovering that I possessed the strength to transform betrayal into wisdom, manipulation into art, and deception into a deeper understanding of what authentic relationships actually looked like. The game Mac and Lana had started with such confidence was long over. I'd won by refusing to let their worst impulses define my future. And as I walked to my car under the soft glow of Portland's streetlights, I knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of my story were still being written.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.